with a chap called Mr. Hani Marcus, who does a lot of AI and robotics.
Gwen?
Hi, I'm Gwen. I'm currently a Neurosurgery Education Fellow at the Royal London. I studied at King's. I did my BSc in Neuroscience at King's. I did my F1 and F2 at Bedford, so I might have met some of you on the wards during F1, F2. I don't know how senior you guys are. And during my F3, I did a Neurosurgery Junior Clinical Fellow job at King's.
And Duranka?
Hi there. So my name is Duranka. I did my undergrad at King's, including a BSc in Anatomy, Development, Human Biology. Having done my F1 and F2 back home in Southend, what I decided to do was do an MRes in Advanced Neuroimaging at UCL, where I'm currently at now, doing a project in terms of intracranial pressure under the hydrocephalus team, such as Mr. Tom and Mr. Watkins.
Super, thanks ever so much. And as I say, thank you very much for coming this evening. So our sort of first general question is, what attracted you to neurosurgery? And should we sort of go for the same order? Hugo?
Yeah, go for the same order.
Yeah.
Okay, neurosurgery. I think it's one of the specialties that people don't really get a huge exposure to until latter years of medical school. And having done kind of your physiology and all your basic science, and then once you get into clinical, for me it was just instantly attractive. It was fast paced. I think it's very
Actually, in the meantime, Dr. Oti, are you happy to?
Sorry.
It's very technically challenging. You know, it demands total excellence. And I think having done, you know, psychiatry or geriatric medicine or even just medicine in general, I think once you get onto a neurosurgical firm and you're surrounded by like-minded, kind of high-energy, proactive individuals, it's quite satisfying to be part of that team. I think the research itself is extremely interesting. You know, the human brain is super complex organism that we're kind of just reaching the frontiers. All the other technology that we're developing is allowing us to really progress our understanding of neuroscience and directly related to patient outcomes. And I think the final thing which attracts me to neurosurgery is it's really challenging. You know, every day you have to be on peak form. You know, you have to give it your all. And for me, you know, even though that's hard, and it can be exhausting, it can be draining, and you have stamina, actually the challenge and the constant dedication to improving yourself, I think makes it a very attractive specialty, which is going to have lifelong learning, and you directly improve patients' outcomes. You know, not always for the best, but, you know, it's not someone coming in for a diabetic checkup, which just doesn't interest me at all. You know, it is, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, but most operations are life-changing, whether that you save someone's life or you restore quality of life. And I think that is probably one of the reasons that we all are interested in it.
Yeah, Hugo, you kind of taken all of my words out of my mouth. But I'm actually quite unusual, I think, in that at the age of 6, I announced to my mother that I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. Obviously, along with policeman and ballerina and whatever, but neurosurgeon is the one thing that I've wanted to do since I was 6, and it's something that hasn't changed throughout medical school. Like I'm sure everybody here, I was just fascinated by the beauty of the brain, and I love how logical the brain, neurology, neurosurgery is, because so long as you understand your neuroanatomy, which I love, you can basically figure out what's going wrong and figure out how to treat it. But also the operations are incredible, not just the microsurgical things that we can do, but also all of the non-invasive stuff that's happening. You know, it's really, really exciting. There's a huge advent of technology. There's new resources and new techniques that are being invented every day, and that's really, really exciting. But I also really appreciate the fact that we don't know everything about the brain. And the opportunity is there for us to continue to make discoveries about the brain. And, you know, everything else that Hugo said as well about the fact that you make a real tangible difference with any operation because it's life-saving or life-changing. But also the interactions that you have between yourself, your patient, and their family are extremely rewarding and extremely touching, I find. It's just special. I just love the brain. It's just special. I know that's not very eloquent, but yeah.
And yeah, I'm off mute. So for me, it's slightly different. So there is a personal element to it, but I think the majority of my kind of interest came essentially by circumstance. I was kind of waiting for one of my friends in kind of the later years of medical school, having not particularly decided what I wanted to do. And it just so happened that she'd finished a master's in advanced neuroimaging, and I thought, and I was interested in doing some project work, and I just said, yeah, sure, why not? And it turned out it was in neurosurgery. And then once you actually get down and get on with this stuff, you realize that, wow, this is actually genuinely very interesting. That's what happened to me anyway. Like getting involved with brain tumor research and speaking to patients with Corday-Aquinas syndrome regarding their outcomes post-surgically. And it was, you get a real sense of that life-defining nature of neurosurgery, having actually spoken to these people. It could either get their life completely back to normal, and then the amount of thanks you hear is just amazing. And or you hear about the kind of more deleterious outcomes and the longer term follow-up that you'd still need to engage with the patient in. And that kind of variety, that it creates this drive in you that makes you want to do better and kind of push the boundaries, invent things. And I suppose this ties back into that personal element, because my grandfather passed away from a subdural hematoma, having fallen over. He was relatively young when this happened and in good nick compared to some of the patients that I've seen the procedure done on. But he was dismissed because of his age. And you do wonder if, and in a way, it would be just nice to kind of get into that field and make sure that he was done justice, I guess. So that's my personal element.
Thanks very much. So, you know, sort of to summarize, and thank you for your personal insights as well. We've got some obviously personal reasons, and maybe it's this sort of challenging aspect of the brain that I think is this, and the colleagues, the environment of neurosurgery that's sort of tying a common theme between you all. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to pass over to Esme now. He's going to ask some questions about applying to jobs in neurosurgery. And hopefully her internet will manage it. The Stevenage internet will not cut out.
Hi there. Thank you so much for the answers you've given so far. So we want to ask as well, what was the thing that you did during medical school or later on that kind of helped you most in your application? So whether it be research or experiences or anything.
So I think the most important thing at any stage is to look at what is required to get into ST1 entry. And, you know, whenever you do anything in life, whether it's research medicine, you need to look at where you're trying to get to and then work backwards in those steps. So if you look at the neurosurgical ST1 application, in order to apply, you are scored against a marking matrix. There's about 10 different components. It relates to your undergraduate career. Within your undergraduate career, they're looking at clinical electives, attachments, experience of neurosurgery, undergraduate research experience, undergraduate prizes. I think those are the main components of undergrad. So, you know, that's where you are now. Then it looks at courses. So have you done things like ATLS, Advanced Trauma Life Support, Basic Surgical Skills, Care of the Critically Ill Neurosurgical Patients. So kind of staple courses that you need to do between F1, F2. Within your postgraduate career, they also look at, have you done any postgraduate exams or diplomas? So most commonly people do MRCS. Again, you can only sit this after medical school. People tend to try and get it out of the way early. F1 is a good time to do it. Other parts of the application are postgraduate research experience, postgraduate prizes and presentations. Again, similar to the rest of postgraduate medical education, it's all ranked in terms of international, national or local level. So obviously having an international presentation scores you most points compared to a local presentation. And again, they value oral presentation over poster presentation. And then finally, they also ask some white space questions, which just addresses your motivation and what you foresee as some of the challenges to a career in neurosurgery. So it's much more competitive than other specialties. Like people who generally apply for neurosurgery would be pretty well placed to get into other surgical specialties at ST3. So you're doing kind of an ST3 entry at ST1. So you have to fit a lot of things in. And it can feel quite daunting. I think the thing, depending on what stage of medical school you are, is just try and get involved with stuff early on. I don't know if any of the guys, other people have anything to add.
Yeah, so as Hugo said, one of the most important things is to look at that matrix. Just look at, because it's publicly available, just go and look at the person specification for neurosurgery ST1 entry and identify what your strengths and weaknesses are. So for me personally, what I did at med school, I know that research isn't a big strength of mine. So whilst I tried to get involved with as many projects as I could, sometimes they just go nowhere. And that's part of the reason why I wasn't very good at research for that bit of the application. So I had a look at it and I thought, okay, so how can I make myself more competitive if I don't have research? So I focused my efforts, in addition to that, on other things. So there's a huge section on the application on organizational and leadership skills, and also a huge section on teaching. So one thing that I did at university to help me with that application is I just got involved with societies. I helped set up the Neurosurgery Society at King's. I was treasurer and president of multiple societies throughout my many years. I helped arrange the first neurosurgery conference that KCL Neurosurgery Society had. Things like that are really, really easy points that you can get throughout medical school, because usually if you're thinking, oh, this thing doesn't exist, do it. Because if you can be the first person to do that, that is a great talking point on your application. Because you can say, I organized the first event of this kind for my university, which attracted, I don't know, local or national, international interest. And then you can then explain the work that you went through, your organizational skills, communication, team working, etc., etc. And then that looks great on that part. It's easy points, that part of the application form, and it's something that should not be overlooked, because that can make or break your application from somebody else who might also have the same amount of publications.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to add to this, other than the fact that I think for me, because I got into this late, I've had to kind of catch up a lot. And that means from going backwards in terms of looking at the matrix to actually hunting people down in terms of saying, all right, seniors, I'm interested in this kind of area of neurosurgery. I'd like to see if there was some kind of projects available for that. And I think certainly in terms of, sorry, I'm just taking the thing. I'm just looking at the chat slightly. I'll just try and move away from that. But yeah, in terms of the thing that kind of helped me the most, being proactive about it and just being very blunt in terms of saying what I wanted from the projects that I needed, the leadership opportunities that I need, the teaching opportunities that I needed. And pairing that proactivity with genuine interest in the people that you're working with. Like literally right now, for example, having created a relationship with various kind of surgeons, having, you know, developed these relationships when looking for projects, they literally offer you, for example, the chance to operate with them, because one other thing that you will need to develop is operative competency. And so I was literally just offered right now, just like the chance to go and operate. Now, if you build that kind of relationship, if you do that over time, people see your dedication, and people, and they appreciate that. You get to know everyone within the field. They give you the recommendations of what to do next. And so that personal element, I think, is what kind of really helped me, and it's what I want to kind of add to the conversation here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point that Duranka said, and I think people need to know that you're kind of clinically astute, you know, that you can do some research, you know, and you're not going to kind of be a difficult person to work with. But as we've kind of addressed previously, in neurosurgery, everything is very high stakes. You know, it's not like you're going to do, you know, a hip replacement. And, you know, if you think about the neuroanatomical structures within that kind of femoral region, you know, there's like 1 or 2 major nerves which are very sturdy. And, you know, it does take quite a lot of force to cause a neurological deficit. You know, when you're operating the brain, very, very small, you can be millimeters away from the basilar artery, you know, which if you damage it, you know, it's a brainstem infarct, or it's a severe stroke, or, you know, it's very, very high risk and high stake situation. So alongside everything that we've said about demanding technical, you know, academic and clinical excellence, you also need to be, you know, a human being, and you need to be a good colleague, and people need to be able to trust you. Because if you think of someone operating on your mother or your brother or your sister or whoever it is, you want that person to know that in the heat of the moment, they will make the right decision and will keep their cool. So I think that personal aspect of it is really important as well.
I've got one thing to add to that sort of complements what Hugo and Duranka are saying. You just reminded me, talking about operations. One thing that all of you guys can do right now to supplement your application is start a surgical logbook. So if you go onto eLogbook, you can sign up even as a student and just start recording every single operation that you've seen. Because, yeah, Duranka, you're probably going to
On that note, however, I think it depends what year you're in. I think you can do this if you're in final year, but perhaps not necessarily beforehand. So while, yes, you should absolutely keep that surgical logbook, you should certainly get an idea of what the contents of that logbook actually are, even if you can't formally kind of keep one, so that you can retrospectively add them later.
It might have changed, Duranka, because I kept one when I was a 3rd year, but it might have changed now.
Yeah, fair.
I don't know.
I think I also have one, and also I try and use my logbook not just as a recording of like actually being in the operations, but I use it as a memory jog. So like if there was a really interesting operation that I learned, you know, a nuance about, you know, how to do a specific suture, or use some quite complex anatomical structures, then you can use it as a kind of a working memory log as well.
And there's
it counts for more than just saying, you know, I've done 50 cases, I've done 100 cases, done 150 cases. Well, you know, then if the person who's interviewing you or is interested in speaking to you, and you say, okay, fine, so tell me about, you know, meningioma or cauda decompression that you've seen, because you've said you've done 100 cases, but actually you can't describe any of the surgical steps, or you can't describe any of the anatomical structures. It can work detrimentally in your favor. So it's just, you know, keeping it, but it's also about maintaining your own interest and using it for your advantageous.
Yeah, and it also shows there's a section for commitment to specialty, so it will also show commitment to specialty. But like Hugo said, don't just watch an operation, put it in there and think that's the end of it, because you can be pulled up on it. But usually that's a good opportunity for learning, because surgeons like showing off. So usually when you're in theatre, they will start teaching you about things. It's a great learning opportunity.
Right, thank you so much. So just to summarize really quickly, from the most important things I understand is to look at what's expected of you, and to try and sort of optimize yourself to become the best candidate. And that is both in directions of research, but as well as sort of like leadership and showing that you can be good to work with. and as well as making sure you become technically skilled and possibly keep a logbook. Is that kind of right? Like, summarize, okay?
Yeah, and I guess it's just very important to add that when we're talking about becoming technically skilled, you know, it takes 15, 20 years to become a competent trained surgeon. I've done a neurosurgical job in F2 and I'm doing a fellow job now, you know, and try to get into theatre as much as I can. But, you know, it's realizing that it's a slow acquisition of skills and, you know, it's getting the basics right. So, you know, we're not saying that every third year medical student should be, you know, clipping aneurysms and, you know, opening heads and stuff. It's just, you know, developing the basic skills that will take you through.
Yeah, so marathon, not a sprint, I guess. Amazing. So I'll head over to Lydia, who will ask a few more questions about research and life as a neurosurgeon. Lydia, are you there?
Hi. So yeah, I think I'm going to start by just asking some questions about research and about if you could give us any advice on how to get involved with neurosurgery research while we're at medical school. And if we could maybe switch up the order a bit. So maybe Gwen, if you want to go first.
Sure. I'm probably not the best person to ask about this because, as I said earlier, research was not my strong point. But essentially, the way that I got into it was I just turned up to the neurosurgical department and showed that I was keen. So I said to them, hey, I really want to go into this. Can I come and shadow you guys? Can I see what this job is all about? And then by showing interest and then building this relationship, I was then able to ask them if they had any research opportunities. Don't expect people to hand things to you necessarily, because you have to demonstrate that you are trustworthy and you're reliable. But you can also contact like your neurosurgery society, because they might have some links. If you have any neurosurgery lecturers, that's how I got in. After a neurosurgery lecture, I emailed the consultant that gave that lecture and said, I'm interested. And that's how I got my foot in the door.
Great, thank you. Maybe Duranka next.
Be very careful whom you ask, basically, because in as much as like this happened to me, and it's an unfortunate thing that had to happen. So I was trying to tick multiple boxes here. First of all, trying to get neurosurgical research. Secondarily, lead a team and collecting that research. I was trying to do this, and you know, we got our data collected very efficiently. The senior responsible was very supportive up until that point, and then upon the eve of actually saying, you know, I'm gonna up on the eve of like submitting to an international presentation, he asked me to falsify data. I told him no. So that's and there was a formal investigation into that thing, where eventually the data presented, although the abstract was falsified, the actual presentation data was not. But that can happen. And what you should be very aware of is the reputation of a given department, first of all. And second of all, the whom you're actually getting involved with on an individual basis. Look them up, see what they've done, and see, you know, if they've got a solid background. Chances are, if they have a very solid background, they're not having to do all of this illegitimate stuff in the background. So do your research on the people you want to do research with. Whether that means getting involved with societies who often have, you know, links with people, that's great. But and certainly asking your lecturers, but don't get, essentially be very mindful that people can try and exploit you like that. Very mindful. And especially in a competitive specialty like neurosurgery, just don't become that person who succumbs to that impulse to go along with this.
So I think this is a really big question, you know, the relationship between medical students and research. So I'm going to try and give some of my experience, and then I think I'll try and give some practical tips of what you can do right now. So first of all, research is not always a Nature paper It's not an NEJM clinical trial. It's not like practice changing. What you need to be able to demonstrate from your career at medical school and moving into neurosurgery is that you've been exposed to some research methodologies and you've participated in an overall research project. You know, research is not just a eureka moment which leads to a Nobel Prize. Actually, once you get involved in the nitty-gritty of research, it's a lot of admin, it's a lot of chasing, it's a lot of literature reviews, it's a lot of, you know, going over the same documents. You know, it's not like these sexy clinical trials which you see all over the news. You know, the acquisition of research skills is the most important thing. What that means for a medical student interested in neurosurgery is that all your research experiences don't have to be within neurosurgery. Obviously, in a time-pressured environment when you've got other life going on, but you still want to get involved in academia, if you do some research within neurosurgery, it kind of is much more streamlined and much more efficient because it ticks more than one box, for example. But often neurosurgical research, which doesn't have great clinical trials, and it often takes a bit longer. For example, when I was a third year or a second year or something, I was involved in an ECG. It was the cardiology department at George's, and you know, it was just a simple ECG project, you know, which exposed you to data management, you know, data extraction, writing an abstract. So then, when you do eventually approach a neurosurgeon who are unbelievably busy and actually have people approaching them who are MRes, PhD students saying, "Can I do research for you?" You've got to be really realistic about the skills that you can offer a neurosurgeon, right? So if you're a second or third year and you say, "Oh, I'm really interested in neurosurgery and I really want to do some research. Do you have any projects for me?" You know, as kind of nice as that is, what you need to do when you approach that person is say, you know, "I'm a third year, I've had experience in X, Y, Z. These are the skills I've learned. I wonder if these would be useful in one of your projects." Do you see what I mean? So you need to really focus on not just kind of neurosurgical research. I must get a PubMed ID publication. You have to think about things in terms of what skills you're going to develop and how this is going to aid you be an effective researcher. I also think you need to be mindful of the people who you're asking to mentor, in that they're very busy, and actually it's not as simple as saying, "I've got this project, go." Because if you haven't had much research experience, you need quite a lot of supervision, which takes a lot of time. So often when people don't reply to your emails or don't necessarily hand out projects on a plate, you know, it's nothing to do with you. It's just their own constraints, so you shouldn't be disheartened. I think practically a really strong place to start is trying to do a neurosurgical audit. So these audits are much faster than kind of research. You can turn around a project within 3 to 6 months. This is when you email a supervisor and say, "I'm really hoping to do a neurosurgical audit. Do you have any ideas?" And they will often have, you know, CT audits, which is retrospective data. So it's not patient facing. You don't need consent. If you're at Cambridge, you've got Epic, so your data collection is a godsend because you can use the search function and you don't need to track down any paper notes. Once you've written the audit, you make sure you re-audit it, and then you present it somewhere to like ASSET. You know, they're doing virtual conferences where effectively every abstract, which is an international conference, is accepted. So from just doing kind of very focused, very smart 6 months of kind of academic work, you would tick a box of doing a complete loop audit within neurosurgery. You've presented the abstract and you may or may not win a prize. So that would be a good place to start. Other things like those international collaboratives like COVID Surge, Star Surge, I think Urology's got one, Burst. There's all these different groups that are doing kind of big collaborative research, and all they're looking for is medical students to kind of add data to their database. So it's kind of thinking about those things. Sorry, that was a very long answer, and I think you can go on for a long time about it, but it's about working smart and just making sure that you're being efficient with your time.
No, that's fantastic, Hugo. Thank you so
Sorry.
much.
Can I just, I just wanted to add to that. You've just reminded me, Hugo. It's you know, it's on my mind because actually the application deadline was today for neurosurgery applications. There is now a space on the form where you can talk about your research that you've done either in undergrad or postgrad that did not result in a peer-reviewed publication. So, you know, it's really important to understand research and be able to explain what you have gained from this process. And they ask specifically how it's applicable to your career in surgery. So I know there's this whole drive of publish or perish, and research is great, but as Hugo said, don't be disheartened if you don't get that PubMed ID, because you can still take away lessons from the work that you've done to get there, and you can still talk about that on your application, and you can still make it relevant to neurosurgery.
Great, thank you, Gwen. That's a really valuable insight. So I think I'm just going to move on and have a bit of a chat now about kind of daily life in neurosurgery. So could you maybe just give like an example of like what your typical day involves, if there is such a thing? So Gwen, if you want to go first again.
Sure. So when I was at King's, if it's during the day, a typical day will start at 8 a.m. We'll have the handover from the night team. At King's, the morning meetings are quite good because they do teaching a lot. So the on-call team overnight in the handover sheet will just write the presentation. They won't write what the diagnosis or the CT scan shows. So they'll just write findings, the presenting complaint, and then the lead registrar will ask the SHOs what they think is going on, what the differentials are. Then they'll bring up the scan, and then the SHOs again have to talk through the scan and explain what the findings are. So it's really good for teaching. Then we'll go for a ward round. At King's, it's 20 patients per ward, 20 to 30 patients per ward. I'm at Royal London now, where it's 30 patients per ward. After ward round, we'll get our jobs, we'll delegate the jobs between each other, and these jobs can be mundane things that you'd expect, you know, like chase bloods, chase CT scan results, things like that. But then there's also neurosurgery specific jobs, so do lumbar punctures, make sure that your patient is fasted and ready for theatre. And actually that's one of the most important parts of being a good neurosurgery SHO, making sure that your registrars are happy, because you have to make sure that this patient that has come in for this life-saving operation is fasted, they have their group and saves, they have their fluids written up, they have a working cannula, they have their scans, they have a consent form, their families have been spoken to if they can't consent to themselves, because any one of those things that has been missed can delay the surgery by many hours. You know, if they've accidentally eaten, then that's a 6-hour delay at least. So part of being a good SHO is knowing how to tee somebody up for surgery. So sometimes you'll do that during the working day, and you'll have discharge letters to write, and then you'll go home at 5. But if you're on call, it's a bit different. Should I talk through an on-call day, Lydia? Yeah?
I'll go for it, that'll be interesting.
Okay, so on calls and nights, what will happen depends on which hospital you're at, but generally the on-call SHO will be responsible for dealing with any complications or deteriorations of any neurosurgical patient in the hospital. So these can be things like, I don't know, so you've got sodium abnormalities. A lot of neurosurgical patients have sodium abnormalities. You will have a drop in GCS, and it will be your responsibility to go and respond to that patient, assess that patient, discuss with the reg, make a plan and action it, because usually there's only one reg on call. And if they're in theatre, then you have to have the confidence to understand what this patient might need, but still be confident enough to talk to your registrar and give them that plan. So in addition to that, if the registrar accepts any emergency patients, any referrals from somewhere else, it is your responsibility when they arrive to clerk them in, take an examination, arrange any bloods or scans that they need, book them into theatres if they need to go to theatres, make sure they have the group and save, make sure they've got the medications that they need, you know, for Suborac, Nimodipine, you know, antiemetics, analgesia, things like that. And also make sure the lists are up to date. The lists are very important. So the handover lists, the ward lists, it's a lot of admin, but it's also very, very rewarding admin, because all of the admin that you do will ultimately result in a patient successfully going to theatre. And that cannot happen without your input. Yeah, that's my input.
Thank you. Duranka?
That was a very thorough thing, Gwen, and I think honestly I won't be able to add to that too much. I guess the only other thing is, I suppose, managing patients kind of post-operatively for complications, making sure that their medications are set, and certainly when it comes to anticoagulations, you go on rounds sometimes, and then you realize it was this patient kind of started a little bit too early on their usual anticoagulants, low molecular weights. You need to keep reassessing that. And yeah, essentially just be very cognizant of how things can suddenly drop off or change, really. Like, for example, if you're on at the weekend, for example, and you're covering the registrar on call is covering a different consultant's patients, you'd have to do a lot more liaising with that necessary team, just to get kind of a more concrete plan, because often in terms of what interventions you can do, certainly out of hours, you may be a bit more restricted. So yeah, there is certainly the logistical constraints to bear in mind, as well as the post-operative things. Otherwise, yeah, I cannot add anything more to what Gwen said. It was just the perfect summation of a junior doc's day.
Great. And so I guess finally, Hugo, if you have anything else to add to the initial question, then please do. But we've had a question in the chat that kind of ties in with another question that I wanted to ask. Could you maybe give us some more detail on the kind of amount of on-calls, weekends, nights, a typical neurosurgeon would do in a month? And if you could maybe refer to being an SHO versus a reg or consultant, and if this is more than other specialties as well.
It's hard to say. I think everywhere you work will have a different rota. Different centers do different things. When I was doing F2 in Cambridge on neurosurgery, you would do more frequent long days in a week, and then you would do kind of more weekends. But then after your nights, you do 4 weekday nights, and then you'd have a week off until the following weekend. So it's quite a nice natural break. That's often when people go away or just catch up on stuff, and then you go back into another week of nights. So you've basically spent a month of nights, but you get quite a lot of time off in between. At Queen Square at the moment, I would do maybe averagely probably 1 long day a week, which is what Gwen describes. It's kind of 7:30 until 8, and a normal day for the rest of the week, plus or minus some weekends. But then the nights at Queen Square are, you do a set of weekday nights, which is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 13-hour shifts, and then you're back at work on a long day on the Monday. Or if you do weekend nights, you work on Thursday, you have Friday off, and then you do Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. And so you finish work on Monday morning, then you have Tuesday off, and then you're back at work on Wednesday. So, you end up, I feel like you end up working harder and you don't really get that much of a break. I think obviously when you're thinking outside of neurosurgery, any hospital specialty versus community, so GPs don't do any nights, some practices will do an on-call GP on the weekends or whatever, but whatever hospital specialty you decide to, you'll have on call. Even surgical specialties, there's a differing of workload. So it's kind of what we've alluded to with neurosurgery being high stakes. Anytime you have a new admission overnight, it's generally an emergency. So someone's either had a bleed, someone's developing hydrocephalus, someone's got core equina syndrome, which is the weakness of the legs. So it often requires an emergency operation. I would say 80% of patients do have emergency operations. Some wait until the following day. And then there's probably about 5 or 10%, which are just missed referrals, or they just need to be seen by a neurosurgeon before they can be discharged. Some of my colleagues who do ENT will do a night shift and won't be bleeped at all because there's no ENT, so they actually sleep. I think that's sometimes the same with plastics. So neurosurgery is known to be one of the hardest and most demanding specialties, because if you're making those sorts of decisions at 3 a.m., you know, it really does take it out of you. And I find I never really sleep one night. So even if you have a less hectic night, you maybe have 2 admissions and just some ward jobs that have overrun. You know, as Gwen said, you're chasing stadium abnormalities, which again are really important. And again, as Duranka said, often when you're called by the nurses about something in neurosurgery, you know, a drop in GCS, you know, we're not going to go into pathology lecture, but you have to be very certain that it's nothing sinister, because if someone's had a subarachnoid hemorrhage and they have a drop in GCS, you know, they could be developing vasospasm, which could kill them within, you know, 2 hours unless you do something. So I guess what I'm saying is you might not necessarily always work longer hours or have more on-call duties than other surgical specialties or other hospital duties, but your frequency of urgent, serious, life-threatening calls you have are more frequent. I don't know if you guys agree with me about that.
I think this is the nature of it being a quaternary specialty.
Yeah. But I think it's also important to mention it's not necessarily the SHOs that work horrendous hours. It will be the registrars and above. I think by and large, SHO on-call hour patterns are probably pretty similar to other, you know, high-stakes specialties. I don't know how it is where you guys work, but from my experience at King's and the Royal London, the registrars have to do 24-hour on-calls, and I think that's something that sets it apart from other surgical specialties. And I don't think I've had a general surgeon registrar that was on call for 24 hours. Yeah, so, but I think pretty much everywhere in the country, a neurosurgery registrar will be on call for 24 hours, a consultant will be on call for 24 hours. At the Royal London, you have one consultant that's on call for the whole week, which means they are available 24/7 for the entire week. And that means that they also have to do the ward rounds and clinics and stuff during the day. But outside of that, if they get called at 3 a.m. for something that the senior registrar can't deal with, they have to come in. So it's something else to consider as well, the workload of the registrars and the consultants as you go higher up.
I think the only other thing to add is just kind of more general things. I mean, it really does depend based on where you work in terms of what kind of weekend patterns or night patterns you're going to have, because each rota is going to be designed separately. The BMA recently did move to try and get 1 in 3 weekends, but again, it depends on clinical need in individual settings. So it depends where, you know, an individual department or hospital is in terms of setting that up. You can't kind of guarantee that. There's going to be too much variation.
And things are going to change now anyway with COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah, my rota completely changed during the first wave. I went from having weekends every 3rd weekend and days like every 2nd week or so to having 24-hour calls as an SHO because COVID. So in all honesty, who knows what's going to happen in the future?
Great, thank you. So I guess kind of following on from that, how would you describe your work-life balance, and what would you say are kind of the pros and cons of working in neurosurgery? So maybe Duranka, if we start with you. I
mean, I'm probably the worst person to ask here because I'm doing the full-time masters for now, but so it's kind of periodically locuming with the studying put in. So I think on that front, if you are going to take an academic kind of slant to things, it depends how much you want to prioritize individual project work within there, with your kind of work stuff on the outside. Ideally, like, it depends on your deadline. So for me, like with MReses, they tend to put more weight into the projects, and so you get less kind of modular deadlines with these masters. So you can spend kind of more time with the work side of things. So that's been a bit of a boon, certainly on that front. I will definitely leave the rest to our other colleagues.
Hugo, maybe next.
I don't think it is what you make of it. I think I'm very busy at the moment. There's been applications, there's been ACF applications. You're trying to develop your skills technically. You're trying to develop proficiency in managing acutely deteriorating patients. That's just acquisition of knowledge before you've even got into kind of those day-to-day jobs that Gwen described. They're not very stimulating, but they take up a lot of time. And if you care about the patients, they sometimes weigh in your mind. And you think about things when you leave the hospital, and you think, did I do that right? Or if I picked something up sooner, would the outcome have been different? Which I think, of course, is all of medicine. But again, coming back to that high stakes thing of neurosurgery, that actually, if you did something a bit different in the operation, would the patient have had a better outcome? So there's all these emotional and physical demands. I think you're tired all the time, because when you go to work, you're on from the minute you get in to the minute you finish. You're constantly being besotted by calls, and we're not even holding the on-call bleeps. We're not the on-call registrars, and we're not operating independently. So I think there's that kind of emotional side of it. There's the physical side of it, and then again, as Duranka said, if you're pursuing academia, get home and then have to meet deadlines, or you have to write something, and your weekends quickly become, neurosurgery, which is why they're really interested to know what hobbies you do, how you maintain sanity, how you prevent burnout. Do you exercise? Do you eat well? Do you maintain kind of optimal parameters to keep peak performance? And I think you just have to enjoy what you do. I think there are people who do neurosurgery who get through the grueling training and then go into something. I don't want to get in trouble by saying different subspecialties are less hard work, but some are less operatively focused, some are more outpatient based, some are not as acute and have less rigorous on-call commitments. So there are different ways within neurosurgery. Neurosurgery in itself is a whole world, but I think if you like what you do and you're interested in it, it doesn't necessarily feel like hard work. I do think it's a natural progression as well. I think as a medical student, you're able to do a lot more. I was able to play a lot of sport and do fun stuff. But I think as you progress through medicine, regardless of specialty, it has to become more priority because you have so much more responsibility. But I definitely think choosing something like neurosurgery, it does become all-encompassing. And from what I can see looking forwards, I don't think it gets any less encompassing. In fact, people pretty much do just live in the hospital. And I'm not saying this to put people off, but I think you have to be super realistic about what the future looks like. And you have to be aware that, I don't want to use the word sacrifice, because that suggests that you're losing other things that you'd like to be doing more. But I think you have to be really honest and truthful with yourself if you're willing to forego the opportunity cost of doing other things. I have colleagues who are GPs, I have colleagues who work in dermatology, I have colleagues who work in other specialties, love their job, but when 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock happens, they leave their work behind them, and they go enjoy other stuff. Which is why you obviously, as the medical student, you have to speak to as many people as you can. You have to do your electives, you have to do your odd weeks, taster weeks, places, so you can speak to people and you can experience what it is like, and then see if you enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to add, because both the guys have made some very good points. You do have to think very carefully about the future. Neurosurgery might seem like a great idea right now, but think about what your ultimate life goal is, not just as a medic, but also for yourself. Do you want children? Do you want to have a family? Do you want to have a pet? Not all of these might necessarily be conducive to neurosurgery without the correct support. I'm very, very lucky in the fact that my husband is extremely supportive, and he's always said to me from day one, your job takes priority over me. But I think I'm very, very unusual in that regard. And there are I know some neurosurgeons who are married to somebody else who just says that you're married to your job. And like I said, like at the Royal London, the consultants are on call 24/7 for a whole week. And it's impossible, it just permeates your life. It is impossible to get it separated when you get to that stage, because unfortunately, you are constantly thinking about your patients. For me personally, the payoff far outweighs the cons, because it depends on what you want out of life ultimately, and what you think job satisfaction means to you, and what you want to get out of that job. But I don't really have anything else to add apart from what these guys have said.
I mean, ultimately in life, it's just about, yes, the support. I agree certainly with that. And the ability to be pragmatic with your time, certainly, as you were saying, Hugo. But, you know, for example, let's take an example of social media. If anyone's familiar with a chap called Martin Pham, I can't remember how to pronounce it, Pham, living through your, getting in some value and enjoyment out of your hobbies is certainly something that you can do, and you can still benefit a lot from as a neurosurgeon. You can bring a lot of value to you. He's, for example, very into wood design, which and he's been selling things as a result of that. So that's a nice side hobby. And indeed, if you have a goal like that you want to set for yourself, it may take a bit more time, granted, in terms of what you can actually put into it. But there's no reason you should just give up on things automatically because of the drainage. In fact, having something outside to kind of motivate you away from work it's another way to keep yourself engaged. Because if you get used to a certain level of work, or there's a degree of habituation with any job. So a way to kind of keep yourself going is that stuff outside, and making sure you organize that and can be consistent with that, and making sure you're not giving it up.
And again, this is something they ask about on your application form. So yeah, it's also important to have a life outside of neurosurgery, but you do have to think about what compromises you might need to make. But it's very important to have other hobbies. Very important, otherwise you'll never be able to switch off.
Great, thank you so much. They've been really, really useful, insightful answers. I'm just conscious of time. So if we maybe to wrap up, if each of you could kind of give just like a summary sentence of advice to aspiring neurosurgeons. So maybe Gwen, if you'd like to go first.
You didn't give me any time to prepare. That's a hard one. A one-line summary is really hard, but I would say be honest and realistic to yourself about what you want out of life and what you want out of your career. If it's not for you, that's still okay. Like, I know people who have gone all the way through training and then decide at the very end that it's not for them, but that's okay. You just need to be honest with yourself, and don't be afraid of saying no to opportunities because they don't agree with you.
Thank you. Maybe Duranka?
In addition to remaining honest with yourself, you need to maintain your own sense of integrity, as well as and just make sure that you're developing that sense of passion, kind of as a passion and commitment as long as you go, because you know that you're going to be in it for the long haul. And you need to get into that habit of saying, all right, fine, it may be a rough day now, but I can get through that. I can perhaps be upset for maybe a couple of days or whatever, but I'll get there in the end, because I know that in the end, what my goal is to look after these patients and be the best that I can be is something very honorable. And making sure that you don't kind of step on people on the other way, like I had happened to me, and making sure that you're encouraging others on that road too, because this is a hard road. So being committed, being someone of integrity, and being encouraging, that's kind of my 3 points.
Yeah, nice. I wouldn't really. I like how the other two have touched upon those really human traits. And I think that's really nice. I think practically get excited now. Everything takes a long time in neurosurgery, and if you get started now, in 2 years' time, your application will be looking strong. And I think neurosurgery is kind of a rabbit hole. Once you start going down it, it's like, Duranka said, his research opened those doors, and then he spoke to someone else, and then this happened. I think that just happens with neurosurgery. For me, I found the more I did of it, the more I exposed to the different subspecialties, you meet more people, you suddenly start getting this really warm buzz about it. So I would strongly encourage you to have a look at kind of things that you could work on, or things that interest you, and just go with them. And you'd be surprised by how much it kind of enlivens the rest of your medical degree, because it kind of adds purpose to it. So you just get stuck in now.
Thank you ever so much for all the answers to your questions. I think we've all massively benefited from hearing from you today, and we really, really appreciate you giving up your time this evening to talk to us. We hugely value hearing from junior doctors and doctors just about their experiences. So thank you ever so much. Obviously, in normal times we'd give you a roaring round of applause, but obviously it's a little bit different over Zoom. But thank you. I'm just going to share my screen as well, and it's just a feedback form and a QR code to the Facebook link for the conference in Lent if you are interested and if you enjoyed today. But yes, absolutely. Thank you very much to our speakers, and hopefully you can see the screen. Sorry. Oh, my Zoom is very conveniently decided to crash now. Okay, hang on.
Oh, get used to it. NHS technology is even worse.
Okay, hang on, let's try this. Super. Hopefully you can all see that. And thank you ever so much to our speakers and to everyone that's come this evening. We've got a great turnout, and we're super pleased, especially to those that have been in Zoom lectures all of today and then sort of have come to another Zoom event this evening. I'll leave that up for a couple of minutes, but obviously feel free to leave once you scan them. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having us, and good luck to everybody who's attending this. The fact that you're here is already a great start.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Good luck to everyone of you.
Thank you. So hopefully, I'm not sure if there's anyone left, but hopefully you've had the chance to fill those in. I'm going to end the call now.